Hey everybody, we are live. Chuck Holton here coming to you from my studio in Panama. And we've got some grim news today out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Many of you have already heard that there was an active shooter, that a Catholic church in suburb of Minneapolis. I have a picture of the church here. It's the Annunciation Catholic Church and school there in Minneapolis. Now we're going to talk about what we know, which is not a lot right now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to keep your church safe from attacks like this. As you know, churches are soft targets, and very often they are chosen specifically for that purpose. Now, I'm actually sort of tied to one of these church shootings because the church that I went to when I was in high school, where my dad was the church administrator, he called himself the pastor of toilets and air conditioners, where he worked for 20 plus years, suffered an attack like this in which 9 people died, including the shooter. The guy shot at my dad during the event. And that kind of put me on a trajectory of wanting to have more to do with helping keep churches safe. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And so I appreciate all of you being here. And I hope that you will share this podcast, because doing so may actually save a life. Because we're going to talk about some concrete steps that you can take to make your church safer by the training a church security team and things like that. So first of all, put in the chat box, if you don't mind, where you're watching from. Interested to know how many of you are from inside the United States and how many of you are from outside the United States. And make sure that you hit the subscribe and the like button as well. Also, I wanted to point out that I made a 2-part documentary about church security several years ago in conjunction with my friend Tim Miller and Lionheart International Services Group. Lionheart is a group of security professionals that goes around the country and trains church security teams to protect their flocks, their congregations. And they are the premier church security training organization in the country. And I can say that with, even though I was at one time on the board of that company, I can say that with all honesty, because many of the companies that do church security training are run by former police officers. But if you think about it, former police officers were trained to respond to violence, not to, predict or prevent violence. On the other hand, Tim Miller is a former Secret Service agent, and his job was to protect the president and make sure that nothing ever happened. So they had to be in the prevention business a lot more than in the response business. And so he does a fantastic job. He is literally one of the most educated men I've ever met in terms of security, counterterror, all that sort of thing. And that's one of the reasons I've had him on the show quite a bit. You can go look at a bunch of great videos from Tim Miller by going to at Lionheart Skills here on YouTube, and you can subscribe to his channel, or I will put the link to his website in the description of this video. Okay. Now, we do have a sponsor for today's video. It's Bright Core Nutrition, but I'm going to save that the read for that to the end, and you're going to want to stick around for that, because it's actually more of kind of like an infomercial talking about microplastics. It's something I've been studying a lot recently, and so you're definitely going to want to stick around toward the end to hear that. Now, let's first get into what we know about what has happened in Minneapolis. If we go to live updates from Fox 9 News, sources confirm the subject is dead, and there's no active threat to the community, but several children were injured, and multiple people, including the suspect, are dead. We don't know how many. We don't know who the suspect was. We don't know anything about him at this point, and it's dangerous to speculate. So we're not going to speculate on a terror motive or anything like that, because especially in the first 72 hours after an event like this, it's just foolhardy to do so. Now, one thing that I will say is that when churches are targeted, one of the big reasons is because they are known to be places of safety that are supposed to be open to all. And there's a real sort of contradiction in terms of saying we're going to lock down our church, and yet we still want it to be open and welcoming to all who come in. I mean, churches are supposed to be hospitals for hurting and broken people. Well, unfortunately, very often those hurting and broken people bring their hurt and brokenness along with them when they come to the church. And so there are a whole lot of reasons that you need to take it seriously in your congregation, and actually have a plan, have a security team, and not just for a bunch of guys carrying pistols. I mean, I'm all for that. I think that one of the big mistakes that's made in our country whenever something like this happens, and you can virtually guarantee that Governor Tim Walz is going to come out and say something very soon about the need for more gun control. And the problem with that is that what you are doing, if you try to take everybody's guns away or make it much more difficult for law-abiding people to get a gun, is you are just making everybody more vulnerable to the bad actors in the society who don't follow the law to begin with. So you can pass all the laws you want. There's already lots of laws against killing people at churches or anywhere else. But if you pass more laws to make it more difficult for your law-abiding citizens to protect themselves, what you're doing is you're saying we're going to make everybody safer by making them more vulnerable. And that is not a good plan. It's not one that I agree with in any way, shape, or form. But you're going to hear a lot of that in the coming days as we talk about what happened here at this church. Now, this is, very serious. There's some of the vast majority of mass or active violence events are actually not really reported on outside of local stations anymore, because, at least according to the FBI's statistics, and what they consider to be a mass shooting is any event in which 3 or more people are shot by the same perpetrator or perpetrators. The problem is that the vast majority of mass shootings in America, by that definition, are gang related. They're gang shootings that take place in inner cities across America. And they are not the very high profile shootings at churches and schools and, places of work. By and large, they are drive-bys. They're young men killing each other, usually young black men, unfortunately. They're over 80%. If you strip out the suicides that are done with a firearm, about 80% of the firearms violence that takes place in America is gang related. So the kind of shooting that we've seen here today in Minneapolis, in which at least 20 people have been shot, from what we understand, is the kind of thing that is actually quite rare. Not rare enough by any stretch, but is not the kind of thing you need to go around fretting about. It's just something to be prepared for, and to think ahead about what you would do if something like this happened in your congregation. Okay? So I want to show you a story I made about a training that we did in Chicago with Christ Church in Chicago with Lionheart International Services Group. And so let me see if I can find this. No, that's just a picture. Might be this one. Take a listen to this little package. It's about 4 minutes long that I did about a training that we did in Chicago. June 19th, 2019. A Syrian refugee was arrested in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for plotting to blow up a local church. His intent was to inspire other church attacks in the name of ISIS. Former FBI agent Mark Lundgren warns that an attack like this could have far-reaching consequences.
If 2 or 3 successful attacks on churches occur, what we're going to see is a conversation over the dinner table on Saturday night. Honey, should we take the kids to church tomorrow, or should we just live stream this? And if you don't think that's going to impact the very ministry model of every church in America, you probably just haven't thought about it.
Many churches these days have some sort of security team, but Lundgren is working to help these teams network with those from other churches by starting the Secure Church Network, an association of church safety and security leaders who meet to share tips and tactics for keeping their congregations safe.
So what we want to do is create an environment where worry-free worship can occur.
At a recent Secure Church event near Chicago, several hundred attendees got a chance to do scenario-based training aimed at approaching security as a ministry. Former Secret Service agent Tim Miller led the training.
So church security is unique because the skills we need week after week are largely not firearm skills. They're skills like talking people down. We call it de-escalation. They're skills like dealing with mentally ill people. They're skills like understanding that people come into the church with a variety of addictions. And how we respond to them really matters, because on the one hand, we want hurting people to come, but on the other hand, we want to keep the congregation safe.
You know, you're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to be a victim of a mass shooter attack in a church. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be training and prepared for it. More likely, you're going to have a medical emergency or maybe a mentally ill person come into your church, and those kinds of things need to be prepared for as well. And that's why training like this is so important.
Let's pray that he is with us today.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
I think you just have to watch the news today, and you can tell that things are changing. There's just an expansion of these radical ideologies, mental health struggles, even anger against people of faith. And because the conditions are changing, I think leaders need to be more thoughtful than ever about how they really shepherd people, how we protect the flock that's under our care, and whether that means imposing new kinds of security protocols to help protect folks against bad actors, or whether it's just thinking through more carefully the practices by which we're going to be ready to give medical aid in a time of emergency. It feels like we have a responsibility that is even more intense than ever before.
What's the problem, ma'am?
The training included some unique tools, such as a high-tech virtual trainer that lets attendees experience dozens of different scenarios in a short period of time. It's the same method used by law enforcement.
Having those conversations ahead of time, doing some drilling. I know that our officers will come through here off hours, so that way they can learn the layout much better and even do some training.
We want them ministry-minded, but also highly skilled. Now, church security is different because, as you know, churches are welcoming, inviting places, and security tends to keep people away. So it's important that we train church security folks with the mindset of ministry.
I just don't know any church leader that wants their gatherings to start to feel like some kind of an armed encampment. But the good news, it seems to me, is that there are practical ways of increasing security in the life of a religious community or church without losing that sense that it is still a very warm and welcoming place.
Participants say they get a lot out of working together with other churches.
So we're part of Secure Church Chicago, and we attend these on a regular basis. They've been very impactful in helping us develop a plan and a strategy.
This is my second time attending a training here with Secure Church, So it was really informative. Even just making connections and networking with other churches was also a benefit to being here. But just having a facility to be able to do scenario-based training was the real advantage for us.
In Chicago, I'm Chuck Holton.
So you see the kind of training that we do there, and you can see why it's so necessary by looking at what happened here today in Minneapolis. Now, imagine your kids are going to this private school at a Catholic church, and you hear that there's been an active violence event at that location. What's your first response? What do you do? I have some video of the parents coming to get their kids out of the school once the event was over. But you are not going to be able to go and protect your kids. You're going to have to be able to trust that the school or the church where your kids are going has got its own security in place, and that's why this is so important. Take a listen.
Being here after this, and it feels a little intrusive to try to go up there and talk to them, but I did ask one person who is a neighbor to my brother if everybody was okay, and she told me, well, everybody here, but not everybody. And she kept walking after that, but you can see there are a lot of somber faces here. We saw some children who were clearly shaken up by what they witnessed, whether it was something they saw or heard or both.
Sorry, that was really distorted there. The audio was too loud. If you have questions or comments you want me to reply to, put them in the chat here, and I will get to them toward the end of the podcast today. And so I will get to all your questions and everything. Just put them in there and we'll move them over to my little list so I can make sure not to miss any of them. Okay, now again, I just wanted to reiterate what we know about this. This is a church that's located on West 54th Street in South Minneapolis. This is a bedroom community. It's a fairly upscale community. Most of the homes in that neighborhood are single-family homes, so it's not a bunch of tract housing or anything like that. And again, we don't know anything at this time about the shooter. I try to make a habit of not giving out the names of people like this because that's what they want, is the notoriety. But we don't even know his name yet. It has not been released. The FBI, the ATF, and Homeland Security are all on the scene. And this is something that there's another big kind of glaring need for training. Whenever you have an event like this, what you get is a large number of various law enforcement agencies all responding at the same time. At the beginning, when the Columbine shootings, I think, was the first real mass shooting of this era, and at that point, the standard operating procedure for law enforcement was to wait for backup or wait for the SWAT team before they go in. The problem they found is that if this is an active violence situation, there's going to be more and more people dying while you're waiting for backup. And so the SOP has changed to be very clear that you're supposed to go hard. If you are the first guy on the scene, even if you're by yourself, you go in there and stop the threat. So that creates a more chaotic situation because you might have multiple people, even civilians, going in armed to try to stop the threat. And that makes a much more complex environment, but it at least has the possibility of stopping the shooter much faster and saving lives. But it is very, very dangerous. And so the various law enforcement agencies, whether they're federal, state, or local, need to be training together, because if you think about it, these guys all show up, they all have different frequencies on their radios, they have different call signs, they have different brevity codes, and different tactical techniques and procedures that they train for in a situation like this. And they may not all be compatible. So if I'm running in and I'm a sheriff's deputy and a guy comes running up behind me in civilian clothes wearing a tie with a gun, first of all, I've got to be careful not to shoot somebody who's not the bad guy. Secondly, if that guy's from the ATF or something like that, how are we going to communicate and say, know that we're using all the same hand signals and things like that? So there's actually a movement that is centered out of Little Rock, Arkansas, but from the Direct Action Resource Center, which is a training facility that was started by a bunch of former special operations guys. And what they do is they bring cops in and train them together in an environment that standardizes all of that stuff of how you go about clearing a building where there may be one or more active shooters. And it definitely has made a difference. There have been Darcy Direct Action Resource Center. There have been Darcy trained cops at most of the recent terror attacks or shooting events or active violence events that have taken place in the United States. And it wouldn't surprise me if there were one or more of them that responded in Minneapolis. Now, we're going to go to the map here and show you where this is located. So we'll pull the map up. This is Minneapolis. This is the Annunciation Church right here. And obviously you can see here, they've got the Catholic school over here, just across the parking lot. And this looks like maybe a rectory or something where the priests might live. But apparently they were all over here in the church itself for Mass, for a service of Mass. And let's see if we can see no, there's no photos of the inside of that church. So now if we zoom out a little bit, at Minneapolis, you can see this is kind of in the southern part of the city. And so it's not right downtown. There's been a lot of speculation already about the large contingent of Somalis who lives in Minneapolis, something like 80,000 Somali migrants, about 40% of which were born in Somalia. That live in Minneapolis. And I've actually been to Minneapolis to do reporting about that issue. And again, now I'm not making a connection here between the Somali community and the church necessarily, because we have no idea who the shooter was or what his motives were. But I just, many people know that crime has risen pretty dramatically over the last 5-10 years in Minneapolis as the number of Somali migrants continues to swell to the point where Somalis now make up almost 2% of all of Minnesota, which is mind-boggling. It's weird that the Somalis would have come to Minnesota to begin with. I don't know that they had a choice. I think that maybe that was something that was decided by the Refugee Resettlement Service. But, if you've never been to Somalia, I have a couple times, and it is hot, desert, very, very hot all year round. And so taking people like that and taking them to one of the coldest places you could possibly find in the United States is just a little strange, but they adapted well, and there are a lot of Somalis. But there have been some politicians up there that have complained about the violence from the Somali gangs that have, formed. And I've talked about that a lot. As I went up there to report on that, what you realize is that a lot of these people come from places that are not civilized, and just bringing them to the United States is not going to make them civilized people. They don't know what civilization looks like. They don't know what rule of law looks like. And so they tend to bring kind of the things that they were fleeing from in their home country with them when they come over. Now, that's a separate issue from this act of violence, and we will just have to wait and see what the overall motive, etc., is as more and more information comes out. Now I'm going to go refresh because okay, so now we're saying the most recent updates are saying 1 person dead and 6 people wounded in a mass shooting. That 1 person may be the shooter, I'm trying to see if they're calling that. Officers responded to a shot spotter activation just before 1:30 p.m. on the 2900 block of Clinton Avenue. The activation indicated as many as 30 shots had been fired. The gunman had a high-velocity .223 rifle, just a standard AR-15 platform rifle. When officers arrived, they located 2 of the 7 victims at the scene. An adult male was killed and another was wounded. 5 other victims, 4 adult men and 1 adult woman, were located with gunshot wounds in the area. 3 of those victims were considered critically injured, but all are expected to survive. The shooting scene is across the city from Cristo Rey Jesuit High School, which was in session at the time. I'm sorry, across the street from Cristo Rey Jesuit High School. That's the one that I pointed out on the map there. Earlier, okay. They say that the alleged shooter fled the scene in a vehicle and is still at large. So the initial reports that the shooter was among the dead appear not to have been true. And this is what I'm talking about. When we're just an hour or two from event like this taking place, what you're going to find is that there's fog of war and all that just makes it virtually impossible to know what the truth is. And I experienced this firsthand back in the late 90s, 97, I believe. I was at choir practice at my church in Maryland when I lived in the Washington, D.C. area one night. And I received a phone call from my mother saying from my sister saying there had been a shooting at the church where my dad worked and where my sister and I had attended when we were in high school before we left home. And my sister said they had not been able to get a hold of my dad. They knew that there were people that had been killed, and she was really worried. So I left choir practice and went and started making phone calls. Finally got a hold of my mom. She said that she had heard from my dad, but he had said, I can't talk. I'm okay. I'll talk to you later, and hung up. I thought at first it was maybe an altercation in the parking lot. Like, some guy showed up and they got in a fight or something over a parking space, and he, pulled out a gun and shot the guy or something. As it turned out, the shooter had never been to Wedgwood Baptist Church. He lived nearby, in a nearby neighborhood, but this guy had some very serious mental issues that came up and drove him to do this, as it turns out. Before he left his home to commit this act of violence, he apparently filled his toilets full of cement. And things like that in his house, just like really weird things. Then he took a gun and a bunch of ammunition and even a couple of pipe bombs he had made, drove, through those neighborhoods past like 3 other churches, and came to Wedgwood right as they were having a Wednesday night service with about 400 kids, which is about similar to what this event here in Minneapolis had. There were 370 kids in the service, from what I understand. There was a Wednesday night service going on at my dad's church. It called See You After the Poll rally. They have these See You at the Poll rallies at the schools around Fort Worth, where the students lead prayer gathered around the flagpole in front of the school. And so then there was a band, there was some skits and things like that were going on. About 400 teenagers in the sanctuary of the church there in Fort Worth, Texas. When the shooter came in, he was the first thing that happened was he was confronted by the custodian of the church because he was smoking a cigarette, and the custodian came over and said, "Hey, you can't smoke inside here." And the guy pulled out a gun and shot the custodian in the stomach. Then he proceeded to shoot several people who were just sitting in the foyer talking. One of them was a friend of mine. She died immediately. And then he moved toward the sanctuary. Well, my dad was in his office, which was just off of the foyer, and he heard the gunshots. And my dad, having been a firefighter and a fire investigator and things like that in the past, knew that, hey, that's gunfire. And so he got up and went and opened the door from his office to the foyer, and the gunman was coming at him, was walking right toward him. And my dad's standing there in the door. And incidentally, my dad was a very large man. And the gunman took a knee, aimed at my dad, and fired 2 shots. The first bullet hit the door frame next to my dad's hip. The second one went high. At that point, my dad decided that discretion was the better part of valor, and he turned around, closed the door, and ran back into his office, picked up the phone, and called 911. The gunman then turned and went into the sanctuary and started to shoot teenagers in the sanctuary. Now, here's where it gets weird. At first, the kids in the sanctuary didn't know that this was a mass shooting. They didn't know what to think because this was obviously so out of the ordinary. It's something that we call just normalcy bias. Where that's not normal, and so my brain can't really make sense of what I'm seeing. So a lot of kids thought it was a skit. As this guy was coming down the aisle and shooting people, people thought it was a skit that was being put on, and so they started jumping up and saying, "Hey, shoot me, shoot me." And this is the craziest thing ever. There was a woman who was videotaping the service with her handheld video camera. And she saw the guy and again thought it was a skit. All these kids are laughing and joking about it. So she walked over to the guy and started filming him from fairly close up, filming him as he was doing this. And he saw her and turned and aimed very carefully and fired and shot the video camera out of her hand. Then he turned and kept shooting. Now here's where it gets even weirder. There's a balcony in the sanctuary of Wedgwood Baptist Church. And so when you come in to the sanctuary, at first you're under this large balcony. And so you can see the pulpit, but you can't see really above the pulpit. But if you go down the aisle, as you get closer to the front of the church, what's revealed to you is a big cross up on the high on the wall above the baptistry. And when the gunman stepped out from under that balcony where he could see that cross, he recoiled as if in pain. This is no joke. I've heard this from many eyewitnesses who were there. This guy, went, "Ah!" and went back under the balcony and continued to shoot people. Then he made his way back out from under the balcony again, threw a pipe bomb, and then when he got down closer and where he could see the cross again, he went, "Oh!" and like it hurt him, and turned around and went back under the balcony. And at that point, there was a young man who realized what was going on. By that point, 8 people had been shot and killed and several more wounded. And this young man stood up and held his arms out and said, "Hey, I know where I'm going. If you want to shoot me, go ahead. Do you know where you're going when you die?" And something about that kid's bravery made the gunman walk, he didn't shoot him. He just walked over and sat down on the back row of pews right against the wall and put the gun to his own head and took his own life. Now, the other thing that was about to happen right at that moment was there had been an off-duty police officer who was a member of the church, and he actually lived right across the street from the church. And he was at the service that night, but he didn't have his weapon on him. And so when they realized there was a shooting going on, he had to run back across the street to his house, get his body armor and weapon, and then come back across the street to the church. And he was opening the door to come into the sanctuary and confront the gunman when the gunman took his own life. It's almost like he knew that his time was up. He had several magazines worth of ammunition, more than 100 rounds of ammunition left. He had another pipe bomb left. So, this is, to me, I just tell you this whole story to tell you that I believe that there is a demonic element to all of these active violence attacks. This attack that happened in Minneapolis, we don't know a lot of the details. What I'm recounting to you, for those of you that are just joining, is a church shooting that happened at my church in Fort Worth, Texas, back in the late 90s at Wedgwood Baptist Church, the church where my dad worked. Obviously, that was a very traumatic experience for all involved. And it will be a very, Bobby Cat, I'm going to tell the story the way I want to tell the story. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry. So that was a very traumatic event for all involved. And especially afterwards, after the actual danger had passed, then it was, as people started to realize what had happened and what could have happened, how much worse it could have been, it's almost like the stress level continued to rise after the threat was gone. And people were spinning themselves up into a frenzy. My dad was running around trying to comfort the families and deal with the wounded and direct traffic when the police showed up and the fire department showed up and the press showed up and everybody was going crazy. My dad, he didn't come home for, I think, a day and a half. And he was so busy dealing with all this stuff. As a matter of fact, the governor of Texas, which at the time was George W. Bush, showed up and wanted to, pray with the church staff. Now, to his credit, George Bush did not want it wasn't a publicity stunt. He did not want press there. He did not want to make a statement. He realized that just by his presence, he was actually complicating matters. And so what he did is he showed up at the pastor's house and talked to the pastor, and they brought the staff back to the pastor's house and prayed with the governor of Texas, and then the governor quietly left. But you can imagine, I mean, they had to, there were so many wounded and little children who were separated from their families, that their families were all trying to figure it out. And this is a large church campus, but what they ended up doing was moving everything across the street to a nearby public school. And the wounded were being treated over there. They were, it was just insane. So that's the kind of thing that we're seeing right now in Minneapolis. And again, having been through that with my dad, I kind of understand how these things go. And, understand, number one, there's always a demonic element to these kinds of events. Always, always, always. I've never seen one where there wasn't a demonic element to it. Number two, people who aren't there, so like the parents, the loved ones, whatever, it's much worse in their minds than it likely is in reality on the ground, because if you're on the ground, you know whether or not you are in danger. You know whether or not there's a threat is still presented. But if you're not there, you don't know if that threat is continuing or not. And it's people just get frantic to get there and to find out, and to get their kids out of there and that sort of thing. So all of that to say that if you are ever in a situation like this, just try to stay calm, and the typical advice that you hear in a active violence situation is run, hide, fight, right? So run away if you can, hide if you can't, and fight if you must. And I think that's good advice for anybody who doesn't have any training or capability to actually do something about it. What I've always said, though, is that if you're a grown man and you find yourself in a situation like this, your priorities should be the opposite of that. It should be fight, hide, run. The first thing you should do is run to the sound of the threat and do what you can to stop it, even if it's throwing a chair at the guy or distracting him so somebody else can tackle him or anything like that. If all of the men present follow the run, hide, fight mantra, well, men can run faster than women can. And so what you end up having is the most vulnerable, the children and the women, end up being the ones who are victimized most because the men have all fled. So we need to think about this ahead of time, guys. And we need to say, if I'm ever in a situation like this, I am going to be, even if I have to sacrifice my body, I'm going to put myself between the most vulnerable and the threat. And I'm going to do what I can to put a stop to it. Now, look, even if you get shot, in today's day and age, with the technology that we have and the knowledge that we have about treating that kind of trauma, you have a more than 80% chance of survival. It's usually like 88% of all gunshot wounds are survived in the United States, because we have a lot of stop the bleed training and things like that. You can actually increase those odds by carrying a tourniquet with you. I've got a tourniquet in my bag right there that I carry with me all the time. I'm always carrying a tourniquet. Even if you don't have a weapon on you, a tourniquet is the next best thing, because you can literally save a life by stopping the bleeding if somebody is bleeding out. So that's step one. And ladies, how hard is it to put a tourniquet in your purse? The tourniquets I carry is not much bigger than this AirPods case when it's folded up. And it's hard to make an excuse that you can't carry a tourniquet. Obviously, so what I'm getting at is that if a guy walks in with a gun and starts shooting people, and all the men present converge on that guy, a few of those guys are going to get shot, most likely. But they're going to overwhelm the assailant, take him down, and save lots of lives in the process. And if there are a few people around that are carrying tourniquets, then the guys who do get shot are likely to survive until the paramedics get there. And look, I said this on TV one time when I worked for the National Rifle Association. And any of you heard of the, I think it's called the Young Turks? It's a TV show or a YouTube channel or something, extreme left-wing TV show called the Young Turks. They actually did a whole episode about me and how ridiculous is it that this idiot, Chuck Holton, would tell people to actually attack the shooter, to say that men have the responsibility to make things safer wherever they go, and to stand up and be the one that stands in the gap, that stands between them and the most vulnerable people. They actually made an entire episode, TV show, about how ridiculous they thought that was. And to that, I just say that tells you a whole lot more about them, because in a crisis situation, those guys, those soy boys at the Young Turks, are going to be curled up in the fetal position, and they're going to be a liability and not an asset in that situation. So Sink, whoever that guy is, what a joke that guy is. I found it absolutely hilarious watching them try to mock me, because in their worldview, men standing up to protect the weak and defenseless is a ridiculous concept. And that's why good, solid, conservative Christian people need to have a lot more babies and outbreed people like Cenk Uygur, because we need more people who think like we do and not people that think like that. Chunk yogurt, you call them chunk yogurt. Yeah, that's pretty close. And so, look, we got 2,000 people watching, folks. Do me a favor, hit that like button. I know you need to be reminded. It does certainly help the algorithm, and tells YouTube more people need to be watching this. And this episode in particular is a very important one for people to see, because of the links to the church security training that we're going to put in the description. And I just uploaded the first of 2 parts of that church training documentary over at chuckholton.com. It's available for paying supporters over there. So if you want to get access to the documentary, this is a very good training documentary. If you can't afford, if your church is small or whatever, and you can't afford to bring in Tim Miller and his team to do church security training for your church security team, then the next best thing is to get this training video and to show it to your church security training team, because it really walks you through all the steps you need for concentric rings of security and how to go about securing your congregation. So I'm going to upload both the first and second parts of that documentary over to chuckholton.com. And again, you've got to be a paying supporter to get access to that documentary. So again, 1 dead for sure, 6 others injured after a gunman opened fire. The gunman is still at large. He was shooting with an AR platform, 5.56 millimeter NATO or .223 caliber rifle. And this is in South Minneapolis during a mass with a whole bunch of about 300 school children. Okay, so we're going to go over now, and we're going to take a look at the questions, your questions and comments. I got to go find that document. Okay, there we go. And so Mike Silva says, after something as tragic as this, do you think that private schools should be outfitted with law enforcement, same as public schools? They don't necessarily need to be law enforcement. They can be armed security. But there should be people who are armed at every school. I would not send my kid to any kind of public or private school that did not have armed security. And honestly, I wouldn't send my kid to any public or private school anyway. My kids were all homeschooled all the way through. Every one of these events is an advertisement for homeschooling, without a doubt. Beth Sillers Anderson says, is it true that people are not allowed to pray anymore in the UK? I don't think they can pray publicly. The UK has become an incredible nanny police state, and I'm thinking about making a trip there if these wars sort of quiet down a little bit to report on that. Because look, if you live in the UK, you don't live in a free country. There's no way you could argue that the UK is a free country anymore. If you can be arrested for flying the flag of your own country, I think that means that your country is occupied by a foreign hostile force. If you can get arrested for defending yourself against rape, robbery, whatever, and the perpetrator of that crime will not get arrested, but you would get arrested for protecting yourself, like the Scottish girl who was literally trying to protect her and her friend from a bunch of migrants that wanted to rape them. And so she pulled a knife on them and they arrested her instead of the migrants. That's not a free country. It's not a country I would live in. I would up and move if I was British. I would not put up with that. You've got to vote with your feet. Voting at the ballot box at this point is probably not going to do it. And so I would leave. I'm sorry. I would leave. Lyle Smith says, who protected the children of Uvalde, Texas? Yeah, there was a terrible mass shooting in Uvalde. I forget, that was a few years ago. And that was was that the one at the Walmart? Or was that the church shooting? I think it was a church shooting in Uvalde. Actually, I interviewed the guy who stopped the shooter. He lived across the street, heard the shooting, took his AR platform rifle, went across the street and stopped the shooter, which just goes to show that it takes a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. And so we need more good guys with tools to make the community safer. Jeff Beal says, we have a small congregation in Mississippi suburbs. Should we have someone carrying every worship service? Absolutely, without question. At our small church in West Virginia, at any given time, there's probably a dozen men in the sanctuary that are carrying, including the pastor up at the pulpit. And so I highly recommend that you train and get some church security training, because there's a whole lot more to it than just Billy Bob carrying a pistol, in his waistband when he goes to church. There's a whole lot more to it than that. And if you fail to plan, what you're planning to do is fail. Okay, KP1 says, this shooter shot from outside through the windows. Should churches focus on the outside more than the inside? Well, what we talk about with church security training is that you should have concentric rings of security. So you have security around the pulpit, you have security around the sanctuary, and you have security around the church campus. And so that includes security officers in the parking lot. And at our church in West Virginia, we have gone to that model, and it actually is very helpful, because then we've been able to thwart, for example, like robberies, smash and grab robberies in our parking lot. Sometimes if there's a estranged spouse or something like that that's angry, it's going to come, get his kid out of that church or whatever, we're able to intercept him in the parking lot and, de-escalate that situation before it gets inside, where it could be a lot more deadly. So yes, that's exactly what I recommend. Lexi Lime says, are the church and school connected? I believe so, yes. Martha Bennett says, how do all these crazy people get the tech knowledge to commit these crimes? Doesn't take a whole lot of knowledge to go get a gun and figure out which end you point at your target. Because, I guarantee you most of these shooters have very, very, very little training, probably have never fired 100 rounds in training. And so that's why if you are a member of that church or a member of the community who makes it your business to train and to go out once a month and go through 200 or 300 rounds, you will be very well positioned to put a stop to the threat. I remember a active violence event that took place at a church in White Settlement near Fort Worth, Texas, a few years ago. And a homeless guy or some crazy guy walked into the sanctuary during the service, pulled out a sawed-off shotgun, and shot the very nice deacon who was coming up to welcome him into the church. Then he shot another guy right next to him. And before he could shoot anybody else, a guy carrying a pistol from across the sanctuary, but he was a firearms instructor, so he was very well trained, pulled his pistol, aimed, and shot the guy right between the eyes from clear across the sanctuary. Now, there were 6 people in that sanctuary who had firearms on their person. Only 2 of them even pulled their firearms. The other 2 the other 4 didn't even have a chance to, because this guy managed to put a stop to the threat very, very fast. And so it's tragic for the 2 guys who were killed because they were shot at point blank range with the 12 gauge, but it could have been a whole lot worse because there were a couple hundred people in that sanctuary at the time. So that's why training is so important. And one of the reasons why I think the way Lionheart does their training is so good is because they use that Milo range training system, that video-based laser training thing, because they've got over 1,000 different scenarios that they can load up in there. And the scenario actually changes based on your actions. So if you shoot the bad guy and miss, the bad guy keeps on doing his thing. But if you hit him, then he falls down. If you don't shoot him and you say, drop your weapon, and you point your weapon at him, the computer that runs that thing is smart enough to know, to listen to what you're saying. And the guy, in some cases, might drop the weapon and put his hands up. And then you don't have to shoot. So they do a whole lot more than just target practice. It's more like de-escalation training on steroids. It's a very expensive, it's like a $70,000 system. So if you can get the Lionheart crew into your church, or even do a citywide training for all the churches in your city, I highly recommend it, because these guys are the best training you can get for your church security team. Martha Bennett says, okay, we already got that. Nico says, if he's dead, then why don't they release his name? Well, apparently he's not dead. He got away. That was false information that was coming out. Again, fog of war. Gloria Byrne says, do you put a tourniquet above or below the wound? You put it between the wound and the heart. So if they're shot in an extremity, if they're shot in the arm here, you'd put the tourniquet above that wound. If they're shot in the chest cavity, you don't put a tourniquet on their neck or anything like that. Okay, so, and a tourniquet is for arterial bleeding, where the guy is going to bleed to death. There's a lot of blood. You'll know if you need a tourniquet. I've seen in a lot of cases where there's just a scratch, where a guy just gets scratched. He's got a cut. He was maybe cut by a knife, or he just got nicked by a bullet or something, and they start putting a tourniquet on him. There's no need to put a tourniquet on him if you can just put pressure on the wound and stop the bleeding, okay? So a tourniquet is not the end-all, be-all of first aid. Use your brain if you get into a situation like that. California says, any information about the shooter? Not much yet. Sarah Jones says, with shootings and guns more rare and difficult to carry in Canada, how do we best prepare here? Well, carry a good first aid kit and do a lot of medical training. You should perhaps, if I was on a church security team in Canada and we could not get a permit to carry a firearm, there are other tools available that are less than lethal that might be available to you, like bear spray, or there are non-lethal air pistols that basically shoot like a paintball, but it's made of PVC plastic, hard PVC plastic, that will not kill somebody, but it will certainly make them rethink their life choices if they get shot by those things. And so if a guy comes in with a knife or whatever and starts causing problems in your church, you can chase him out of there with one of those. And I don't know if they're legal in Canada, Canada being a communist country and all, but if they are, you should definitely look into them. Here in Panama, I can get a firearm, and I own one here at our house, but they also sell those air pistols. They run off a CO2 cartridge, and they shoot these PVC like paintball things. And I would almost rather have one of those, because most likely if we have a home invasion or something here, the perpetrators are not going to have a firearm because there just are not that many in Panama. They're harder to get. And so rather than killing some teenage kid that's trying to rob my house, I'd rather just light him up with one of these and make him, reconsider his choices and then leave. But you do what you got to do. I carry in my truck, I carry bear spray, I carry bladed weapons, I carry blunt weapons, and very often will carry a firearm if I'm going someplace I think that it's necessary. So I have lots of options available to me. Going right to the firearm is not always the best course of action. I highly recommend that you go and watch Tim Miller's videos. Also go watch the Active Self-Protection channel here on YouTube. My friend John Correa runs that, does a very, very good job of training you on real life situations, how to deal with that kind of stuff. Okay, One Way says, would reversing the thinking of accept everything and change the thinking to pushing back on bad behavior help? Well, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely would help. Okay, so I appreciate you all being on, and again, I would appreciate it very much in this case, especially if you would take the time to share this video and get the word out to your friends, or go to chuckholton.com and share the link to that, where people can get the documentary on church security training. There obviously will be a lot more information that comes out about this event in Minneapolis over the coming days and weeks. And let's just hope and pray that the people who are injured will survive, and that the police are able to thwart these kinds of events in the future. I mean, some people immediately say, oh, it's probably a terrorist. Probably a Free Palestine kind of person. I would say more likely, I mean, if you had to guess, the majority of the church shootings and school shootings and things like that we see in America these days, not related to gang violence, are mostly from the incel community. That's the involuntary celibates. And I've done a lot of podcasts about incels. Maybe we'll rerun one of those shortly so that you can kind of go get that easily and go see it. But this is something that we all need to be on the lookout for in our communities, in our churches, in our schools, in our workplaces. There are so many young men out there who are really disenfranchised just with life, because they spend virtually all of their time online. They spend it playing violent video games and surfing pornography, and it leads to this toxic mix in them of, it's the world's fault that I can't get a girlfriend and I can't get a job and nobody loves me. And so many times the perpetrators of these kinds of events end up being involuntary celibates, because they just say, I'm going to go out with a blaze of glory. If you know somebody that's got a teenage son who spends all his time in the basement or in his bedroom playing video games, you need to reach out to that kid. You need to talk to the parents, and you need to try to see if there's a way that you can, engage with that kid and keep him from going down that path, because the demons inhabit those kinds of violent video games and pornography, and there's no question about it in my mind. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching the podcast today. We are going to go to a word from our sponsors, and this is worth watching because I did a bunch of research on it, and I think you're going to actually like this this short ad. So take a look at this.
You know, lately I've been going down a bit of a rabbit hole. You know how that goes. You read one article and then another, and suddenly you're 10 studies deep and wondering if you need to go live in a bubble somewhere. For me, the rabbit hole was microplastics. Now, these tiny particles are everywhere. And the more I read, the worse it gets. At first, I thought, okay, easy fix. Stop microwaving leftovers in plastic, ditch the bottled water, and avoid eating off anything that says made in China. Done. Problem solved. Yeah, not even close. Turns out the majority of microplastics we ingest don't come from bottles at all. They come from the air we breathe. So every deep breath, congratulations, you just ingested another dose of microscopic garbage. And then I found studies suggesting microplastics might be linked to declining testosterone in men. Now, that one got my attention because if modern life isn't busy enough trying to kill us, apparently it also wants to turn us all into soy boys. So fantastic. Now, scientists have literally found microplastics inside blood clots, and yes, that means a higher risk of heart attacks and strokes.
White ones, we've got clear ones.
Tons of microplastics wash ashore all over the world every day. And now for the first time, scientists in the Netherlands have detected microplastic pollution in human blood.
All the microplastics and nanoplastics we are exposed to, we inhale and we ingest, that actually, you know, there's so much plastic that it can even enter our bloodstream.
The Dutch study on blood samples from healthy adults detected tiny plastic particles in 80% of people.
And it's not just your cardiovascular system either. They've also found it in the brain, which, let's be honest, explains about half of the comments section that I see on YouTube these days.
And we start with a new study on the impact of microplastics, which found human brains contained as much plastic as a plastic spoon, which is up 50% from 2016.
What we're finding is in the brains of people who have dementia, there's actually higher amounts of microplastics. So essentially, these microplastics, or these tiny little particles of plastics, are crossing the blood-brain barrier, and they're depositing into our brain. And they're being correlated with increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases like dementia, possibly linked to autism and other things that affect the brain. There's also evidence showing increased risk of stroke, and increase inflammation overall. So I have always said, listen, there's no way to avoid microplastics entirely unless you're going to live in a bubble. And by the way, that bubble couldn't be a plastic bubble. It'd have to be a glass bubble.
And if you didn't already have enough to worry about, like a plastic spoon worth of microplastic in your body, here's a fun one. Missile launches. Yeah, apparently every time a rocket goes up, it sprays microplastics into the atmosphere. The nearly 40,000 missiles that were fired into Israel during the war, well, each one of those helped pollute the planet just a little bit more. So it's not just Israel's problem anymore, it's your problem too. So thanks, Hamas. Appreciate the global contribution. So avoiding plastic forks isn't going to cut it. You can't exactly hold your breath the rest of your life, which kind of left me wondering if there's any way to actually get this junk out of my body. Turns out there is. And it's not from some high-tech lab, it's from kimchi. Scientists found a bacteria in kimchi called Bacillus pumilus that can actually degrade toxic BPA plastics, which means while you're eating fermented cabbage, those microbes are basically running search and destroy missions inside your body. Even RFK Jr. was on Fox and Friends swearing by kimchi.
Mainly meat and then fermented vegetable, anything fermented. So a lot of kimchi and all kinds of fermented vegetables. And it's really, I would say it's dramatically changed my, everything.
I figure if it worked for him, maybe it's worth a look. Now, full disclosure, I've never been a fan of kimchi. I don't want my fridge smelling like a science experiment just to get the benefits. So that's where Bright Core Nutrition comes in. They're not some sketchy supplement startup. They're a trusted American company making clean, non-GMO, all-natural products. And now they've bottled the power of kimchi into a capsule
called Kimchi 1. No cabbage, no chili paste, no funky smell, just all the probiotics, live enzymes, and antioxidants you get from kimchi. Over 900 strains of good bacteria without the taste. On top of potentially helping with microplastic detox, Kimchi 1 also supports digestion, reduces bloating, boosts energy, strengthens immunity, and even improves skin and hair. So it's basically kimchi without all the baggage. So here's the deal. Go to mybrightcore.com/Chuck and use promo code Chuck for 25% off. Or if you want the best deal, pick up the phone and call 888-927-6882. When you call, you can get up to 50% off plus free shipping. And if you're one of the first 100 people to call, you'll also get a free bottle of vitamin D3. But remember, you only get that 50% off when you actually call the number. So again, that number is 888-927-6882. So look, we can't stop modern life from trying to kill us between seed oils and social media, and now missiles sprinkling microplastics into the stratosphere. The deck is kind of stacked against you, but we can at least fight back. Kimchi 1 is one small, simple step that can keep you from feeling like a human Ziploc bag. So hit the link or call now. Your heart, your brain, and maybe even your testosterone will thank you.